All right. Well, I've got one after one. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started as we've got a few more people that are trickling in for the webinar. But again, thanks so much for being here and spending an hour with us to talk through some spooky tales right before Halloween. And we're excited to share our three data horror stories and how we survived them today with you all. We'll spend this time just kind of digging into how data management pitfalls can sometimes sabotage our fundraising efforts, whether it's double data entry or lack of soft credit usage to kind of that existential threat of chaotic data practices. But anyhow, we'll talk through learning how to slay some duplicate records, survive messy database mergers, and build a path toward database consolidation. So we hope that by the end of this session, you won't just be ready to handle your data, but you will be ready to conquer it and transform any data chaos that you're dealing with into a strategic asset that drives your organization's success. So throughout the presentation, if you have any questions or things you'd like to ask that come up, you can feel free to use the Q&A box down at the bottom to submit those throughout or put them in the chat, whatever's easiest. We'll have a few little fun interactive elements as well. So looking forward to have you participate in those too. So as we get started this morning, just to introduce quickly our three presenters, I am Holly Parrish. I've been in the fundraising and nonprofit world for close to 30 years now, and with JCA for about 6 and consulting for close to 13. So trust me, I have lived through many data horror stories in my time and love that we're going to share some of those and bond over some trauma together. And I will toss that over to Liz to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Liz Murray, and I'm the Vice President of Professional Services at JCA. I joined JCA in 2017. Prior to that, I come from like a hospital foundation background and arts administration. And I am based in Kitchener in Canada. Rashida?
Hello, I'm Rashida Brown. I am a senior consultant for JCA. I've been in the nonprofit space working in and around the Washington, D.C. area where I reside for about 25 years. I also have been consulting for about 10 years and with JCA for 6. And before we get started, we do have a quick poll, and we want to find out what CRM your organizations are using. Is it Razor's Edge RENXT, Tessitura, Salesforce, others? If we can take a quick vote here, we want to see what kind of representation we have.
All right. Okay. Appreciate everybody jumping in and giving us a go. Looks like we've got some Blackbaud users, but also some folks on some other systems as well. Well, great. Well, hopefully, like I said, you'll find some similarities within these horror stories to work that you've encountered no matter what system you might be in. So just a quick note about JCA. We here at JCA have been working with nonprofits since 1988. We are really focused on helping organizations manage their data, their processes, and their technology, all to kind of grow their strategy and hopefully deepen engagement and grow revenue amongst their communities. So we love working alongside our nonprofit organizations. We truly see the work that we do as an extension of your mission to do good in your own community. And through those years, our clients have included so many different organizations, over 2,000 different organizations that represent lots of different verticals and types of works, everything from museums to attractions to healthcare to higher education to advocacy organizations. We've worked in a lot of different spaces. All right. Well, now it's time to jump right in to our 3 horror stories. And we're going to start off with the hack that backfired. We're going to move into the spooky tale of the shotgun database marriage, and then over to the promotion dilemma. So, like I said, all names and places, they have been removed to protect the innocent, but these are all actual real life horror stories that we have encountered. So let's have a little fun. I'm going to turn it over to Rashida, who's going to share our first horror story, The Hack That Backfired.
All right. Before we get into the story, I want to do something a little interactive. I want to ask a would you rather? So would you rather be, and we're going to launch a poll to get your answer. Would you rather be trapped indefinitely in an elevator with your entire board of directors or lose all of the soft credits in your system? I have a sense of what the answer to this one might be, but whatever your answer is, it will say a lot about your board, more about your board than you. Oh, okay. I want to know who those 29% people are who'd rather lose all their soft credits than be in an elevator with their board. Either one of those I think might be a nightmare for some of us. All right. So let's talk about the hack that backfired. In our first horror story, we're going to set the scene for you. We encounter an organization who had a report writer who was more comfortable with basically hacking their system rather than using its native reporting functions. So, with the hackers' knowledge of the system and their report writing skills, they developed policies, procedures, and reports using relationships to track soft credits for VIPs and top donors. So, as an example, a board member, their spouse, any DAFs or family foundations or businesses that they might donate through were linked via relationships. And this reporting tool was what tracked the soft credits for all of those individuals and rolling them up to show a giving summary for the one major donor or the one VIP. This system remained in place for 20 years plus and long after the hacker actually left the organization, and then ahead of a major system upgrade, which is pretty much a big nightmare. A very cool new feature of the upgraded system was a giving summary on the record of the donor that would include hard credit and soft credit donations, essentially the exact data that this hacker was trying to report on using this relationship tracking system. So now we have this great feature, but without soft credits in the system, these summaries would not display correct information, or they would be displaying incorrect information in the donor record. So now we have to figure out how do we get soft credits in the system for past gifts and develop a new procedure to ensure that current gifts are properly credited. So, how are we going to tackle this challenge? How do we tackle a challenge like this? Well, first, we have to acknowledge the root of the problem, which is no soft credits in the system on gift records. But also, another challenge another challenge to tackle here is not using the system as intended. So, how do we correct that? We have to analyze the data. We have to create a plan for the future system, for future upgraded system. And what we have to identify what we need to do in order to prevent this change going forward. Maybe changing gift entry procedures and or also using new system features or features that were already in place in order to be able to track soft credits. We have to get everybody on the same page with why this change is needed. I think it was pretty easy to convince people that we don't want incorrect donor summaries right on a constituent's record. So everybody very quickly got on the same page with why we needed to do that. We had to manage user expectations and communicate the tasks with some realistic timelines for the correction, for correcting this work. So how do we fix it? We had to put in a plan in place, again, to fix all of the old records, but also make sure that we had a system going forward. So the first thing we did was identified and exported all the relationships that drive that soft crediting for a particular donor. So we had to pull out all of those VIPs, all of their spouses, their DAF records, and their family foundations, companies, get all of that data, and then use that data to enable automatic soft crediting rules in the system. And just that easy. It was a checkbox that's already in the system. We use that data, we check that checkbox, and now we've prevented this problem for the future, right? We have automatic soft crediting, no more tracking relationships, no more reporting. But how do we go back and clean up all of the old gift records? So we had to export all of those donations for those donors. And using those two data sets, we had to do some matching. So we matched up roughly 2,500 relationships to approximately 22,000 gifts. And we had to figure out who was supposed to get credit for what gifts. We did that matching using SQL. We created an import file and we imported all the soft credits to update the gift records. The final and most important step here, though, was revising procedures, training staff, and making sure that everybody understood the new system. The entire project took only about 6 to 8 weeks to resolve, and we have now woken ourselves up from this data nightmare. So the result of this is that we're now using the system in the way that it's intended. No more hacking, no more workarounds, no more, you know, reports that people don't really trust, no more relationships that are missed or, that we're unsure of. We have all of this data in the right places in the system. We can immediately get a full picture of a giving summary for a constituent or for a donor without having to run any reports. Somebody can go into the record, look right there on screen, and all that information is right there. It's never too late to correct an old wrong, even if it's something you've been doing for 20 years. Recognizing a problem, resolving the problem, having a plan for prevention in the future always is possible in your database. We're using this system as designed. We're leveraging the tools that are already in place to get this information. And now we can trust the data in a way that we never were able to trust the data before. And we have automation in place, meaning that there's no extra work now for overhead for our gift processors. That auto soft crediting is automatically happening as gifts are going into the system. And we did keep the relationships in place for those who were trauma bonded to those relationships in the system if they wanted to still see them and know who was related to who, those relationships were still there in the system. And I will turn it over to Holly for our next horror story.
Okay. And so before we jump into our next story, another would you rather. So be ready with your answer. Would you rather inherit a database that had no gift entry policies, or would you rather have your organization's website crash during your biggest online giving day? Maybe it's a little too soon with the whole web crashing situation after yesterday's
Yesterday.
AWS situation. I don't know. Maybe too soon, but go ahead. Make your choice. Which horror story would you rather live through? No gift entry policies or organization website crashing on your biggest online giving day? I mean, I know what I would choose. So let's see what you all decided. I would say most of you are with me. I would also rather have my website crash on my biggest online giving day, because to you that may say website crash. To me, that just says early a happy hour for Holly that day. All right, thanks for playing along. And let's set the scene for this next story. So backing up, have you ever been in a situation where you went from being the sole owner of your data to then having to share your database with others? Okay. Or maybe just an area of your database, because kind of like moving in with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, and then how are we going to now handle the fact that we have like 3 couches and 6 TVs? What do we do with all of that? So for all of my folks that talked about being on razor's edge, this is one that you'll probably have some insight into as razor's edge users. But this is a story about 5 different hospital foundations. They all had their own instance of razor's edge, and kind of in this world that we're in now with mergers and consolidations, it was decided that all of those hospitals would then merge all their separate systems into kind of one consolidated instance of Razor's Edge. So bringing it all together. So not only is that a challenge just to begin with, add to that a few other challenges. These were all really small teams. They were okay with doing kind of the day-to-day stuff they needed to do, but overall, they had kind of limited expertise as far as running and administering a system itself. They would get by in doing what was necessary for their organization, but not when they had to work alongside, 4 other organizations. And there was lots of intention that was kind of put into this when this merger occurred, and making sure that each of these organizations could distinguish their data from each other. So there were a lot of strategies that were put in place for that, but what was ignored was really just this wider strategy of how we're all going to kind of use the system consistently. There was no effort to build any kind of consensus around like what our codes look like, how we're calling people different things, how we're using different types of records. So the result of that was a bit of a mess. We had one giant database that became kind of a mess of data, a mess of codes, lots of different usage strategies, and the teams themselves suddenly became stuck. They didn't feel confident in moving forward, changing things in the system, because again, they're now in this shared space. And so they were having a really hard time kind of progressing, implementing any new ideas, and coming together to be able to improve. Now, this is maybe an extreme example, but I think like a lot of us have experienced something similar where we've got this maybe area of our data that we're tracking, and it's nice and neat and tidy, and we totally understand and it all makes sense. And then we're now asked to consume maybe a whole other data set into this area, or make accommodations for a whole new change in program or policy. So I think we can all relate a little bit to that situation where suddenly now we went from having 3 sets of towels to 14 sets of towels. And now we've got to kind of figure out, like, how do we rearrange the closet and make this work for us? All right, so back to the steps of tackling the challenge that Rashida shared earlier. Again, we're going to kind of apply the same methodology as we look at this really complex issue and try to come up with a plan of how do we live through this horror story. So back to our approach. In this particular instance, when it comes to addressing the root problem, problem really was the fact that there was a lack of data leadership and expertise. Again, the situation was all of this coming together, but the root problem was no one really had the confidence to lead any kind of a cleanup or streamlining effort. Everyone was on completely different pages. So then it was time to determine what were the steps to correct. And I'll go over those in a bit so you can see exactly what was done. But suffice it to say, we knew going into this project, this was going to be a long-term effort. This was not kind of a one-time easy fix. The approach was going to have to be really methodical and involve a lot of different people, and kind of collect input from 5 different teams along the way. So as far as procedures, it wasn't necessarily that we had to identify procedures that needed to change to prevent this. Really, the problem is we didn't have procedures, and that's sort of what led to this. Maybe, like I said, there were some localized procedures, but nothing that was guiding this team holistically. And I mean, when you don't have those procedures, there's still work happening. There's still data coming in. We're still collecting things. We're still adding gifts. So if we're all doing it differently, then the mess is just growing. And in this case, it was growing 5 times as work continued to happen. So it was really important, especially in this situation, to get everybody on the same page. I think everybody understood why we needed to move forward, why we needed to kind of get our brains around this circumstance and develop some more consistent ways and align our strategy around our data management. But it was going to be tough, and exactly how we were going to do that was going to require getting some folks on the same page together. So managing expectations was a big part of this process. These teams needed constant reassurance, and they needed the ability to provide constant input into the process. Because again, there was already a real lack of confidence when it came to using these systems. Um, and this plan had to be super realistic for small teams that had minimal expertise. And there was also an expectation of them that not only are we going to fix these problems, but there's also an expectation that you're going to level up in your skills, that you're going to learn along the way, and that you're going to kind of own this and make sure you are going to be what makes sure that this doesn't continue on or happen again. And we knew that it was going to be, like I said, a timeline that was long, that we needed to make sure was realistic, that small teams could be part of. But we also knew this was going to be a really big cultural shift for the way these teams were operating. And a key part of that when it came to timeline was focusing both on some short-term immediate wins, but also looking at some high value needs that might take a longer time to correct. So the plan was critical. So the first step in the plan was really to conduct some baseline training. And I think whenever there's a big change, a big shift, or like something very new, it really does help to get everybody on the same page. And in this particular scenario, it meant literally getting people from 5 different counties all in the same room together. They needed the space to walk through how the functionality was supposed to work, to be able to talk about their specific strategies and their requirements, hash out the differences they might have had from team to team. Be okay to like raise a hand up and say, I don't understand this. So we needed to create this space that everybody kind of got together, got on the same page, and walked away feeling confident that we had priorities for our work and we knew what direction we were going. So another really important tool in step in this correction plan was a code frequency report, where we were able to look at all of the data tables. So how the data is organized, what codes we're using, how frequently they're used across the system. And we were able to use that report to really hone in on how we could streamline and consolidate the data and, look at things that were bigger priorities. One of the things we realized when we looked at that code usage report was they were tracking 200 plus different constituency types. So over 200 ways they were identifying people in their system as like, what does this person mean to us? Who are they to us? 200 different ways. And a lot of them were similar. We had staff member, we had team member, we had employee, we had manager, we had a lot of things that were very duplicative. So we were able to kind of use that report to evaluate that and determine like what is the best usage strategy going forward. Um, the next thing that we put into place was to create a data governance team of users. So each site sent a representative to make up this committee with a job of making the data decisions on behalf of the group collectively. So this was a team that was meeting bi-weekly. So as changes and decisions were made, they were meeting regularly. They weren't necessarily data experts, but they were the ones that were responsible for a lot of the data entry at their specific sites. And they served as a steering committee for that work. And they're still meeting now to discuss different things like system features and, new problems that they may have encountered. What was key to that in the beginning was having some expertise to help lead and guide them, but they've now kind of taken a lot of ownership over this process as they've learned along the way. And then the last piece of the plan was really prioritizing an action plan, or what's typically like a backlog of issues that need to be addressed, and looking at those issues from the lens of value. What is a kind of high urgency, high value project versus a medium value project versus a low value project. So some of the high value projects you can see were listed there. Again, I talked about needing to like streamline down and condense down the way we're tracking constituencies. Using that system to not only find ways to kind of universally identify people across all of the sites, but also identify them with some unique or specific things that are particular to each individual hospital. We had to relook and redesign security roles. A lot of the data clutter and problems came as a result of not having kind of the right security settings around different users. There was some high risk data, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, things that had been in there for decades that no one was paying attention to, but were there and were high risk. And then a lot of time around setting up appropriate fundraising structure, tracking, what are we doing to raise our money and how effective it is. So looking at those really high value kind of change projects as we went through the process. And then the result, lots of great results. The best one really, ongoing data governance committee, which they call their data team. And again, they are still meeting once a month. They are serving and kind of learning as the power users of the system. But the most important thing is they're working collaboratively and they are making sure that they are consistent in the way that they are understanding the data, the way they're using the tools, and kind of bridging that consistency across all of the teams. Again, we have a coding strategy now that reflects both kind of bigger divisional needs and local needs. We were able to initiate some different reporting coding that has now helping them create some of their site-specific reports, and also better leverage some of the dashboards and tools that were in the system. They just didn't have an easy way to kind of drill down into their specific information. We have created now a whole library of policy. So as we've gone from project to project or area to area, being really intentional about documenting these decisions that have been made and the kind of step-by-step usage instructions for each area. And then finally, kind of the last result is getting unstuck. And now getting to a place after a year's worth of working and incremental improvement to start implementing new programs and using other parts of the system that perhaps were kind of ignored before because we were just so kind of mired in the other things that we were doing. So lots of great outcomes, lots of implementation that's also kind of partnered together with a lot of learning along the way, which is a great result that can come out of any horror story. And now I'll turn it back over to Rashida, who is going to give us kind of our last case study story, which is the promotion dilemma.
Thank you, Holly. First, we have our next Would You Rather, which I think is probably the most horrific one of all. Would you rather manually deduplicate 10,000 constituent records or seal 10,000 direct mail letters with your tongue? I'm very interested to see what people chose here. I think that either one of these could land you in the hospital. What do we got? Whoa, exactly 50-50. What an interesting group of people you are. All right, so let's talk about the promotion dilemma. You might think this is about a job promotion. It absolutely is not. This is about record promotion. This has a lot to do with relationship types. It can be a big concern for organizations that might be using a system like the Razor's Edge, which we know maintains non-constituent records. It doesn't require you to create a full constituent record for a particular individual. So every contact or every relationship just doesn't have to have its own record. And so in this particular nightmare, we have a situation where an organization is moving from Razor's Edge that allows non-constituent records to BBCRM, which does not. And so just to understand the gravity of this situation across decades, this particular organization was using the razor's edge, and they had a great deal of non-constituent records in their system. As I said before, BBCRM has no non-constituent records. So what's going to happen to all of these non-constituents now when we are in the new system? Well, the nightmare is that all of those non-constituents in Razor's Edge will become constituents in BBCRM. This resulted in about 80,000 new records created from those non-constituents. We found this problem in a very early test run as part of the conversion. We identified those 80,000 new records that would be created, and we realized that about half of those would probably be duplicates. In some cases, triplicates, some quadruplicates, and even a few quintuplicates and octuplicates. And I really liked going to see how far I could go with those words. I may be exaggerating a little bit, but there were lots of duplicate records in this system. And this was important data. It represented spouses, event guests, employers, employees, organization contacts. So just to give you an example, may have 200 individuals in the system that are Bank of America employees. So now that we're going from non-constituents to constituents, it is possible that we will have 200 Bank of Americas in the system from those non-constituent employee records. We don't want 200 Bank of Americas in the system. Another situation was across multiple events. A board member may be bringing the same guest. And so that non-constituent guest is tracked one time per event attendance. And so once those records get promoted, that same guest, which could also be the board member's spouse, may now have, you know, multiple records in the system representing each of those event attendances, that spouse relationship, and others, as we said, organization contacts, employee, employer. This was a huge problem, and I won't even get into all of the siblings, nibblings, and the pibblings. There's a lot of relationships here, a lot of data, and we have to figure out what's important enough to be a constituent record. So here again, going back to tackling the challenge, this was a very complex challenge. And address the root of the problem wasn't necessarily the system tracking non-constituent records. The root of the problem was really kind of some loosey-goosey practices, right? When do we create a record for an actual organization? If we're tracking 200 of their employees, we probably need to actually have a constituent record for that particular individual. If a board member has a spouse and that spouse is attending events with them on a regular basis, that person is engaging with our organization, and we probably should have been tracking them as a constituent. And so we had to sort of realize that some of the practices and the protocols for managing this data in the system was really sort of the root of the problem. And we had to address that by coming up with some standards about what information constitutes someone having their own record, of course, outside of them making a donation or being somebody who we is a prospect and we're really trying to solicit for donations. Who are those people that we really want to have a full record for versus just noting that this person might have a relationship to another record in another individual and organization in our system. We had to determine the steps to correct this problem. Um, and there were a few steps that, there were a few that we had to sort of, a few things we had to figure out. Mind you, we are doing this in the context of a conversion. So we did not have a lot of time to solve this problem. We needed to, again, adjust the standards around how we're tracking this information, making decisions about when it's appropriate to create a record, um, and identify, what we need to do to prevent this. So we got those policies in place. We didn't have to do much again with this one to get everybody on the same page with why we needed to correct this. Nobody wanted 80,000 possible duplicates in a brand new system. It was just going to be a really big problem for adopting usage of this new system, for trusting the data in the system, and people really understanding where that data came from. So in this short time frame, we had to come up with a very tight plan to mitigate, manage, and clean up as much as we could. We had to really manage expectations because we are in test run number 3, and we are, got a couple of more test runs until we're actually in the system. Our users have seen some of this data as part of some of the conversion testing, and so we had to kind of communicate along the way and let people know what we were planning to do with this data, and that when we were going live, when we got to the point where we went live with the system, they weren't going to see all of these duplicates. So, what's the plan? How do we fix this? The first thing we had to do was to kind of classify those records. What records are we talking about? We've got, different types of relationships. Which ones are the ones that are really valuable? We had to come up with a different strategy for each one of those groups. We had to have a different strategy for spouses than we did for contacts, and we did for employers and employees. So some of the decisions that we made were, in the event that, let's say, an event registration had, was guest brown. Well, that's a DNC. We're not going to, bring that information over because we don't know who that individual is. Of course, it's very obvious all spouses were promoted. We wanted to make sure that we maintain that data in the new system. Some of the strategies required a little more thought and a little more criteria. So when in terms of some of the business relationships, if the business relationship wasn't super valuable or didn't really have, any good or reliable data because it was old, then we consolidated that data and we converted it into a note in the new system. And this was employed in quite a few circumstances throughout those relationships, so that we didn't lose data. So the data was retained, but in a way that didn't kind of add dead weight to the system. From there, we used in the old database, we used a tool in Razor's Edge to actually promote only the relationships that we knew we wanted to convert to the new system. And so we had a strategy for moving the other data into the notes. We promoted spouses, contacts, employers, and employees, important the employee relationships, and we promoted them. And then what we did was we took the entire database and we used SQL to come up with a duplicate matching process to help us locate as many duplicates as possible. Now, this was a university, and so there were many college, there were many familial connections. There were juniors and seniors, and there were lots of, as you can imagine, over, however many years, but lots of individuals with the exact same name. So we had to use some very tight matching criteria. We were able to identify quite a few duplicates, and we were able to merge those duplicates using a mass merge tool to clean that up. And so the result of this in the new system is we do have cleaner, more consolidated data. We were able to take some of that old data that wasn't really um, reliable or as valuable and store it so that we don't lose the data. We set a policy for how we store relationship data. There's criteria to determine whether or not a specific relationship was important enough to warrant a full constituent record and a relationship quote unquote link. We reduced that record of 80,000 to down to 13,000, which was a huge accomplishment. And then we had a clear policy again around secondary or related quote unquote non-constituent records going forward, so that we knew where we could find specific data about these quote unquote non-constituents. There is was, because this was some time ago, but there was a manageable duplicate backlog in the new system. So the organization was able to really use new tools in the new system to manage that black backlog and clear out a lot of the duplicates that maybe our tight matching didn't catch, where somebody could actually look at records side by side and make some good decisions about converting, I'm sorry, about cleaning up that data or merging. We also had a improved user experience and adoption at Go Live. So people really saw the process of cleaning and going through that process and seeing the 80,000 down to, the 13,000 and not many duplicates. So before we go on to the next slide, I'm going to check the chat really quick. I think there might be a question here. Um, so Alan's question is, if the legacy non-constituent name is one formatted text field, parsing into name components is another challenge. This is true. I think in this particular situation, the non-constituent was actually a record in the system, in a separate data table, not in the primary constituent table. So rather than it just being in a text field, we actually had a actual record in a data table that we were able to then promote and turn into a constituent record. But you are right. If that information is just in a text formatted field, it would be another challenge. And I think there are some other things that you could do using SQL or other tools to clean that data up. Could you share more about other options to match? If not SQL, what else could be used? I would say that you want to first start with the tools that you have within your system. And you should have some sort of protocol for regularly checking your system for duplicates and cleaning those duplicates up. I'm going to double check and make sure that there's something else in the Q&A. If you hear it someone else's CRM, do you have suggestions of where to start identifying bad data? You mentioned early data test run. I am going to let Holly kind of close us out, and some of that question is answered in the rest of Holly's information.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll maybe get to that question kind of right when we get to the end after we've kind of gone through some of the last portions, but we'll definitely circle back. And I think an important lesson here is really understanding sort of what a lot of these dilemmas and stories have in common, like what is driving this. And so I think we can find quite a few commonalities that you might be experiencing even in your own organization, which is lack of appropriate policy, which policy and documented steps really are the best way to enforce consistency, especially as staff come and go in your organization through time. There's also, we tend to see a buildup of issues over time and not a plan to regularly correct that. So kind of back to Rashida's comment about having a methodical plan to review data, to update data, to check for data integrity issues, things that you know are problematic on the regular, and having sort of a timed out plan to address those things regularly. Um, that first story talked a lot about misunderstanding our system tools and the consequences of certain use. I'm sure the hacker we talked about earlier thought that they had found a really great method to do what they needed to do, but didn't predict that 20 years later there would be these lovely tools that made that work completely unnecessary. And because they had not used the system in the way it was designed, meant they couldn't leverage those tools. So I think it's always important to, before we make decisions or we decide, oh, we're going to use kind of this workaround to do this, really understanding what the consequence or impact of that decision could be. And then I think we all deal with seeing, and this kind of goes to the question in the chat a little bit, of knowing that different CRMs kind of experience different owners and experience different methods, and trying to get a handle on that can be really difficult. And then most of the time, the villain is really the lack of time and prioritization. So when we're not being intentional about our data integrity and our data governance, that is when these horror stories sort of compound over time. So, what are some lessons learned really from this experience? All right. So, first off, as Rashida pointed out in the first story, that was something that had gone on for decades. But it's never too late to correct an old wrong. I hear people say a lot, oh my gosh, we've just been doing it so long this way that we can't possibly, we're just way too deep into this method. We can't possibly change it now. It's just been so long. Well, that's not necessarily true. As you learned in the first story, you can kind of go back, rewrite a little bit of history, and make sure that you're setting yourself on the right path going forward. We make sure we use the tools as intended. Again, gaming that system or not using it can definitely backfire over time. You may not know what that is now, but you may have to find out and live it later. So investing now in data health, investing time in that and being proactive is really the thing that keeps us from living these horror stories. And sometimes, when we're in the midst of a horror story, as I mentioned with the database consolidation, sometimes you do just need some help and expertise, whether that's something you're getting, from your specific vendor, from another organization that's great at using this particular system, whether it's from a consultant or somebody that you can bring in to have that expertise and provide that leadership to your team, can really help you more quickly solve these issues. And then getting everyone on the same page sometimes is just as valuable as just having everything in the right place. So, building kind of that shared understanding of how we use our system, how we use our data, how we enter our data, so important versus kind of where we get into where every team is kind of maybe doing it their own way, or every staff person sort of has their own method. We want to make sure everyone is on the same page. And then, kind of lastly, again, data management requires a lot of leadership, because I hear a lot in conversation like it's everybody's job to make sure this is right. It's everybody's job to be checking the data. But honestly, if it's everybody's job, you know what the saying goes, then it's really nobody's job. So it is important to establish that leadership. And so with that, we are going to encourage you in this last portion of the presentation to take some time out to rule your data. And I'm going to turn it over to Liz to talk through some data governance principles.
Thank you, Holly. Like Holly alluded to, ultimately the moral of this story really is data governance. Investing in a formalized data governance program can help you avoid living your own data horror stories and also provide a path forward to addressing some of the data quality struggles that you may be holding you back. So data governance is more than checklists and policies. It's about building a strong data culture across your organization. I'm going to share some of the guiding principles that we use at JCA, which can really help set the tone for your data program. They're designed to align stakeholders, ground your decisions in values, and help everyone from leadership to frontline staff understand what good data practices look like. To truly embrace data governance, your organization really needs to live and breathe these value statements. So the first one's pretty basic, but very important for everyone to acknowledge that we recognize data as a strategic asset and a catalyst for collective impact. We respect the rights of our constituents and steward their data with care, consent, and integrity. So trust is really at the core of our work, and this means protecting privacy, being transparent about how we're using our data, and only collecting what we truly need. We commit to using data ethically and in service of our mission. Essentially, we use data to do good and not just to do more. This means staying thoughtful about how we collect, share, and apply data, um, making sure that we are being responsible with our practices. We embrace transparency as a source of accountability and driver of trust. So essentially, transparency really helps you build the confidence both internally and externally. So this means that we don't make data decisions behind closed doors, that we work together and help build stronger relationships with our colleagues and our funders and our partners and the people that we serve. We empower our people with the tools, training, and culture to use data responsibly and effectively. Governance is not just about policy, it's also a lot about people. So our teams need support to be able to use data well through training, clear accountability and processes, and a culture that really encourages learning. We collaborate to create a connected, coordinated data ecosystem. So we can't work in silos and our data can't either. So we're working together across our departments. We improve data quality and we can streamline our processes and get more of a complete picture of the constituents that we serve. And finally, we approach data governance as an ongoing discipline, not a static document. So this isn't a one and done type of deal. Good governance is really a living practice that evolves with our goals and our technology and our needs. So as you develop and execute your data governance program, come back to these principles often as they help you ensure that you're not just using data, you're using it well and with care and in service of something bigger. So on this slide, you can see a framework we recommend for our clients for organizing a strong data governance program. Think of this really as your data governance castle. So just like a castle, your program needs a solid foundation and pillars that support everything else. So at the base, we have data quality and integrity. The foundation of your program. So this is really a non-negotiable part of data governance. Your data must be accurate, complete, consistent, timely, and valid, or else all the other parts of your programs won't be as effective. The next pillar is all about access and sharing. So you need to have those clear roles around who owns the data and who stewards it on a day-to-day basis. This is, again, where collaboration is key. If your team doesn't work together, your data systems will stay fragmented. Plus, controlling access is really critical for security and compliance. The next pillar covers how you collect, use, and retain data. So actually purging data when it no longer serves any purpose. And then finally, the last pillar is about ethics and compliance. We must handle constituent data responsibly, follow legal rules, and uphold ethical standards. This builds the trust that's essential for any nonprofit. So together, this framework can really help you build a resilient, trustworthy data governance program that supports your mission and also protects your constituents. So then building on the whole idea of collaboration and how data governance is really about people. So in a data-driven organization, data governance is everyone's responsibility. Think of it like a governance court, a group of people with different roles working together to guide how data is handled across your organization. Everyone plays a part, and knowing who's responsible for what helps keep things running smoothly. So at the top, we have our executive sponsor. That's a senior business leader who really champions the program and who is ultimately accountable for the success. This person has the authority to make decisions, and without them, your court really has no power to act. The data governance lead is the coordinator, facilitator, and strategist. They connect all the moving parts from policy development to cross-departmental coordination. And so they're the people who are the person who's really responsible for making sure the program is implemented. Data stewards are the people who work with data every day, whether they're inputting, analyzing, or reporting on it. They're responsible for the accuracy and usability of the data in their care. And everyone who touches data is, in a sense, a steward. So most people in your organization will be a steward. And finally, the data custodians are typically IT or database operations staff who are responsible for the technical management of your data. So together, this is your governance court. And although data governance is bigger than paperwork, having the right documents is still essential to creating alignment and clarity. So for example, we have here listed some of the key artifacts that we recommend you build out as you start creating your data governance program. So for example, we have the data stewardship roles and responsibilities document that would lay out who owns which data domains and who's accountable for keeping that data accurate and consistent. These documents aren't just formalities, they're really tools that can help your team collaborate and manage data effectively. They should be living documents that you're using as management tools. So to help you on your journey, we've included a QR code that links to a few free templates that we use for our data governance work at JCA. And we'll share that again in the end. All right, well, before we wrap up with the questions, I want to share some quick information about our Data Buster services. So our team helps solve everyday data problems that sneak in and haunt your database. We're here to bust those data gremlins, cleaning, fixing, and organizing everything so your data stops spooking you and starts working for you. Whether it's moving data between fields, staging prospects, or sorting out fundraiser assignments, the data busters tackle it all. Relationship coding giving you chills, gift records causing confusion, no worries, we'll bust those too. These might sound like small problems, but left unchecked, they can seriously mess with your mission. So grab your proton packs. It's time to bust those data demons and make your data shine. So we have a quick little poll. If you're interested in getting more information or a quote, we'd be happy to follow up with you after this podcast. I was like, oh, now I got really into the ad. Anyway, moving on to our questions period. So here's my real shameless plug. Holly and Rashida are top shelf data busters. So feel free to ask them anything about the presentation or your own data horror stories. I don't know if there's anything additional on that other question.
I
I did.
did what? Oh, I'm
Go,
sorry.
I was going to say I did put an answer to that one in the Q&A, so there's a response there.
And I actually had a response to Martha's question. I wanted to, there was a little more I had to say, not just using, I would say start with your system tools, but there are other tools outside of SQL. Power Query in Excel is a good tool to perform some matching to identify duplicates. It doesn't do the actual merging for you, but there are other tools out there to be able to identify duplicates.
All right. Well, I know we're at times and I want to respect everyone's calendar. So thank you all so much for attending our webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to send us an email and we'd be happy to chat with you anytime about your data horror stories. Thank you very much and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.